There we are. Hooray! Assalamu alaikum, ahlan wa sahlan. Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature, and in particular to this conversation with one of the world's best-loved and best-selling writers. My name's Julia Wheeler. It's my absolute delight, as you can imagine, to be talking this morning with an author who's written some of the most enjoyable stories that many of us have ever read. In settings from Botswana to Edinburgh, Tuscany in Italy to Malmo in Sweden, Alexander McCall Smith has been imagining compelling characters and creating conundrums for them to overcome for more than 40 years. He's sold more than 30 million books in the English language alone. 20 million of those involve a certain lady detective. And his work has been translated into 46 languages. Everyone, please join me to welcome Alexander McCall Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Julia, it's wonderful to have working mics. The mics at this festival so far haven't let us down, because one shouldn't say that, of course, because Nemesis is out there with her radar switched on, waiting to hear that sort of comment. But we've all had experiences with mics, and my experience has always been that they go wrong at some stage during the performance, and that that's intended. And I had one wonderful microphone mishap, which we've all had, with William Dalrymple, who I think is going to be joining us at this festival. But Willie Dalrymple and I were doing an event in Edinburgh before the Edinburgh Hogmanay celebrations, and we were in the green room behind the stage and chatting away, and Will Dalrymple said to me, "How old are your readers?" And I said, "Well, a range of age. You know, I've got some young readers and some readers who are not so old." And he said, "My readers are positively ancient." And that's the point at which the organizers could be seen running down the corridor towards us, and we transmitted this conversation into the audience. And Willie Dalrymple was very embarrassed, and I said, "Don't worry, Willie. If your readers are as old as you say they are, they won't have heard what you said." It was these things happen. These things happen. But anyway, really lovely to be here at this literary festival again. This is my fourth time at the Emirates Literary Festival, which is such a wonderful atmosphere to it. It's
so wonderful to welcome you back. Thank you for being here. Let's jump in with that certain lady detective. Yes. She is, in your words, traditionally built, and she's probably quite keen on comfortable chairs, isn't she?
She would take a very strong view about chairs and the design of chairs. Mara Matsui is traditionally built. I'm very proud of that expression, because it's more or less made it into the dictionaries. I think it is in some dictionaries. So I feel a certain proprietorial interest in the phrase. I used it in the first book when she was complaining about models, Twiggy-type models, who really, she said, the problem is you can't really see them if they turn sideways onto you. You don't see them. And also, it's very dangerous being that thin in that part of Africa, because if you're walking through the bush, you aren't giving snakes any warning, because you're so light on your feet. So she comes up with a variety of justifications for what she calls her traditional build. And indeed, it is true that was popular in Africa. It was considered better to be comfortably built, to be traditionally built. So she is of that view. She shares a view with me. Actually, it's extraordinary. I agree with a lot of my characters on many points. I mean, it's an amazing coincidence, but it transpires that many of the views that my characters have actually are views that I myself am sympathetic towards. I may not agree 100%, but certainly sympathetic towards. So I'm regularly accused of being Isabel Dalhousie or Mara Matsui. A lot of people say, "You're Mara Matsui, aren't you?" And I have to say, well, we're in agreement. We're not exactly the same. But anyway, she shares my view about contemporary furniture as being not really designed for people to use. In that, if you look at the chairs that are produced by designers these days, and you see them in magazines, tremendously pricey. You know, they say, "This is the such and such chair," and you see this slender little non-traditionally built object. and it costs £950 just for one chair. And these chairs are very, very uncomfortable. The Danes have a lot to answer for, in my view. The Danes, it's the Danish furniture designers. Danish furniture designers are not designing furniture for the human body as we know it. Now, it's possible that Danes are evolving in a particular direction, and that the average Dane is becoming a rather different shape from other people.
Do we have any Danes in the audience? Let's have a look at you.
Well, there you are. You see, they're not prepared to confess to this, but nonetheless. So Mara Matsui would have a very thin view of Danish furniture. She wants a chair which is really comfortable, and so in this book, A Song of Comfortable Chairs, we deal with this vexed issue of furniture design. In that Mama Kutsi's husband, he has a furniture store, and somebody has started in competition to his furniture store and is producing these modern, very expensive, well, actually, no, they're undercutting the prices. They're being undercut. And so they have to sort that out. Of course, they do work it out eventually, because Mara Matsui always gets it right. She has a wonderful way of understanding the world. She often in the earlier books, if she talked about the difficulty of finding something out, she said, what you do if you want to find out the answer to something is you ask somebody. And this is the secret of her detective success. And most detective writers don't do that at all. You see, they've got to look for clues, and they try and construct very complex explanations of why. But in fact, you just really go and say what happened, and somebody will tell you. And that does work. That's her main philosophy.
That's her MO, isn't it, really?
It's her modus operandi, yes, and why not? And it gets very good results.
Yeah.
So she always gets it right. Isabel Dalhousie, who's one of my Edinburgh characters, always gets it wrong. She approaches problems in a very complex way. So she's a philosopher by background. She's a moral philosopher interested in applied ethics. And so we get a whole elaborate philosophical construct worked out as to what she should do and so on. Whereas Mara Matsui quite rightly says that the solution to most of life's problems the solutions are very obvious, and that as far as determining what is right or wrong, you just have to follow the traditional Botswana code of morality. And there's a lot of force in that, I think, because if you look at traditional codes of morality, they talk about respect for others, treating other people with decency, courtesy, and so on. Botswana is a very, very courteous society. It's a society in which people treat one another, generally speaking, really very well. It's very striking. I'm spoken to by people who've read the books and who've gone to visit Botswana, and I say, well, what was your experience of the country? And they say, we were so impressed, everybody was so kind to us. And I say, well, yes, I know that. It's a very remarkable, it's a very admirable country.
Something that runs through all of your books, though, whether they're in Sweden, Edinburgh, Botswana, is that kindness through your characters. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think so, yes. I don't deliberately set out with an agenda to write a particular sort of book, or, I mean, my writing career hasn't really been planned. The whole thing is an accident. And I just wrote what I wanted to write about the world. And so I'm a writer who's more interested in what one might roughly describe as the more positive side of human experience. Because human experience is, as we all know, very varied. And you get a lot of bad things in this world. The world, in one view, is a vale of tears. You don't have to look very far to see things that are wrong with it, to find suffering, deprivation, discourtesy, and so on. But that's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that most people actually lead lives of a very positive nature. Most people actually want to be kind and polite to other people and appreciate kindness and politeness when they encounter it. And so I think it's perfectly legitimate to write in that segment, so to speak, in that part of the spectrum. And I'm not saying that there isn't a role for books which concentrate on the negative and concentrate on the harsh face of our times. Of course, that has to be reflected in literature. All that I'm saying is that we shouldn't really tell ourselves that that is the only side.
Yeah.
We're used to entertaining ourselves with violence, horror, and nastiness in a general sense. And there's an entertaining role to that. We want a certain amount of excitement, but there is a whole other area which is a positive experience.
It also strikes me that you smuggle in some pretty serious views, which may or may not be your own or your characters. There's talk of migrants in this book. You also talk in the Botswana context of how nurses are treated, which has been a big thing in the UK. So I wonder whether by being kind, by being amusing, by taking us slightly off guard, actually you are able to smuggle in some of those. I don't want to say deeper, because kindness is a deep thing already, but different ideas.
Yes, I think that's right. I think that you can make what one might perhaps describe as a moral point through humour. In fact, I think it's probably more effectively made with a light touch. Of course, you can ladle on the suffering and the misery, and I think it's relatively easy to do that. It doesn't require a great imaginative leap to describe the sort of things that evoke those reactions of horror or distaste. But I think that you can deal with very serious issues of how we are to treat one another in a very light way, and I would argue perhaps more effectively. So things happen in my books which certainly one would describe as being not really on the light side. So Mama Kutsi's brother dies in one of the books, and it's very clear what he dies of. But I don't really have to spell it out. But I can talk about how his circumstances of his death, he was looked after in a way which made something of his life. That his life prior to that had been not very much, but in his final days, he was given the love and affection that one might find in a hospice. He is, in fact, in a hospice. So you can make that point really, really quite powerfully, but just putting it in alongside the other things that are going on. And of course, if you put tragedy center stage and make everything very grim, you do lose quite a lot of your readers. I mean, I think this is the problem with contemporary detective fiction, is that you have to have the post-mortem examination by page 3. Or the readers will say, oh, where's the autopsy? And so there are no autopsies in any of my books. None at all.
And long may that last.
And so people said to me, some years ago, somebody said, you've got to put in a car chase. It says, you must have a car chase. And I said, well, no, my readers are far too nervous for that sort of thing. So what I did was I had a chase involving supermarket trolleys, which was quite exciting enough for my readers. I could have a system rather like Stella Gibbons in Cold Comfort Farm, where she puts asterisks in the margin where there are particularly fine bits of writing, and then 2 asterisks. One could have a warning. Mind you, we shouldn't joke about trigger warnings, because books these days, people are saying, be careful about reading this book, you may be upset. And they're saying that about Jane Austen. They're actually saying it about Jane Austen. Really? This is madness, absolute madness. In fact, if you say that Jane Austen's likely to upset you, then everything's likely to upset you. Mind you, Enid Blyton is quite upsetting, actually.
Which brings us nicely to 44 Scotland Street, Bertie and his friends, and his enemies, in inverted commas, who want to cancel these boys, cancel culture.
Bertie has been faced with a threat of cancellation from Olive, who's a perfectly horrible little girl, who's got a sidekick called Pansy, and they are really dreadful. Olive says that Bertie's going to have to marry her when they're 20, and she says she has it in writing. And Bertie, who some of you may not have encountered Bertie's a 7-year-old boy. He started off the books at 6, and he was 6 for 8 years in the books. But eventually I had to give him a birthday. I gave him a 7th birthday eventually because the other characters were sort of rough, aging a bit. And it became increasingly obvious that Bertie was stuck at 6. And he kept saying to his mother, "I might do a birthday, Mummy." And so eventually he has a birthday. And he's hoping, he's got this terrifically pushy mother. He's got a seriously pushy mother. We have a major problem in Edinburgh, where I live, with excessively pushy mothers. We have the highest incidence of pushy mothers of anywhere in the UK. It's very, very high instance of pushy mothers. Scottish government is aware of the problem, but hasn't done. I suspect, I've got a slight feeling, and maybe this is something we can discuss afterwards at the signing, I've got a slight feeling that we're in pushy mother territory here as well. Ooh. I think there's some pushy mothers in Dubai, but we've got a lot of them in Edinburgh. And Bertie's pushy mother makes poor Bertie, at the age of 6, he has to learn Italian so he can appreciate Italian culture. He goes for yoga lessons at Yoga for Tots, where the children are so small they can't get into the yoga position. They have to be pushed by their pushy mothers. He goes to saxophone lessons. He does a very good rendition on the saxophone of As Time Goes By from Casablanca, which in his case it doesn't. And he also has psychotherapy. He has psychotherapy with Dr. Hugo Fairbairn, author of that classic of child psychotherapy, Shattered to Pieces, Ego Dissolution in a 3-Year-Old Tyrant. And Bertie has
You have such fun thinking these things up, don't you?
Poor Bertie. All the time he just wants to be an ordinary 6-year-old boy doing the sort of things that 6-year-old boys want to do. And in particular, he wants a Swiss Army penknife, because that's something that all boys and most men actually want, is to have a Swiss Army penknife. And of course, he's not going to get that. For his 7th birthday, he's hoping for a Swiss Army penknife. What does he get from his mother? But a junior UN peacekeeping kit. With little blue armbands. And, really... And then he goes, occasionally he has fun. He has very little fun, but his father took him fishing in the Pentland Hills just outside Edinburgh. And a mist comes down, they get lost, and they end up at a farm. They can't find their way back to the car. They end up at a farm. Farmer's wife says, come away and I'll make you a cup of tea, and then my husband will drive you, find your car. Goes in, and Bertie discovers, to his absolute delight, there's a real 6-year-old boy living in this farmhouse, little boy called Andy. And Andy says to Bertie, "Bertie, would you like to see my things?" And Bertie says, "Oh, yes, I'd like." So he takes him upstairs to his room, and he opens his drawer. Andy opens his drawer, and there in the drawer is not 1, but 6 Swiss Army penknives. And Bertie's little heart fills with pleasure at the sight. And Andy reaches out and takes one of these Swiss Army penknives and says, "This, Bertie, is a Swiss Army penknife. The Swiss Army fights only with penknives." And Bertie says, "Yes, I've heard that." And it really is, it's such a pity. I do want him to get more freedom. He wants to go to Glasgow. He's heard that when you're 18, you can leave your mother and go and live in Glasgow. And so he says that he's got time to learn the language. And which reminds me of Stanley Baxter's wonderful Parliamo Glasgow. Do you remember Parliamo Glasgow? Well, this is Ella's, Fellas and Barella. Anyway, Bertie wants to go to Glasgow with his friend, because he's got a friend now, Ranald Braveheart McPherson. And Ranald Braveheart McPherson is a little boy with spindly legs. And his father, Ranald Braveheart McPherson's father, was recently convicted in Edinburgh Sheriff Court of a company law offence. And he's been sentenced to a community service sentence of 120 hours of Scottish country dancing. Which I think would keep anybody on the straight and narrow. So poor Bertie, I don't know what to do about him. His mother's gone off to Aberdeen to do a PhD in the work of Melanie Klein, but she is threatening to come back. So that's in the offing. But I do have great fun with those characters. And that's a serial novel. I write that for the Scotsman newspaper, and it runs chapter by chapter every day for 3 months, and then it comes out as a book.
And how does that change the way that you write compared to No.1 Ladies Detectives and Varg, which we'll come on to talk about as well?
It's a totally different technique. I started doing this after I had met Armistead Maupin, author of Tales of the City, at a party in San Francisco at Amy Tan's house. And Armistead said to me, whatever you do, don't write a serial novel in a newspaper, because he'd written Tales of the City in the San Francisco Chronicle. So I went back to Scotland and did just that and started it. That was about 17, 18 years ago, and it's been carrying on since then. And it does have a formula. Every chapter is about 1,200 words in length, and it's published, as I say, on a daily basis, as I write it in the Scotsman. But we have 3 chapters dealing with a particular set of characters, and then we modulate into the next 3, and that I find works. And I think the readers quite like it, because they could read 3 chapters on the journey to work while driving to work. And I should put a warning.
Yes, you should. Let's turn to Sweden. So, Ulf Varg.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in how you created that character in comparison to a very established character in Mama Rawotsby, because he is in so many ways the exact opposite of her, but then so similar.
Yes, I think that's very interesting, Julia. I think there are similarities between them, some similarities, and then some obvious, considerable differences. But I started writing this series of books. That's the 4th one. In fact, I'm looking at the copy-edited manuscript of the 4th one this morning over breakfast. It's at that stage. It'll come out very, very shortly. Ulf Varg, I decided to write Swedish crime fiction when, like everybody else, I was enjoying the offerings of Swedish and Norwegian and indeed Scandinavian crime fiction in general in the boxed set version. So we loved things like Borgen. It was marvelous. You know, you could really have a wonderful time watching Borgen. Or the Killing series 1 was terribly exciting. I worked out who did it, actually, in the very first episode, and then I changed my mind with every episode thereafter. But I did notice one of the chaps had an elastoplast on his neck, and I said, that is a classic device. And I was proved right. No, not that I'm boasting, but I was proved right. Anyway, I thought that everybody's getting such pleasure from Scandinavian noir. Let's have a bit of Scandinavian blanc, in which nothing really nasty happens. And there's no question of any bodies at all. So I invented the Department of the Department of Sensitive Crimes in Malmö, in Sweden, and with Ulf Varg, who's the chief detective of that department, and they look at odd occurrences. So there's nothing as mundane as homicide. It's all sort of strange crimes or antisocial acts. So there's no violence at all. The only violence we had was in one of the books where somebody is stabbed, but only to a very small extent, in the back of the knee. Just a tiny incision in the back of the knee. And Ulf is very interested in this because it's a low-level wound. And it transpires it was a dwarf who stabbed this person through a tent. They were standing in a tent, and suddenly they felt a prick in the back. So that was about as extreme as it gets.
And he describes himself as an avenger of minor nastiness.
Minor nastiness is what it's about. And what I did was I took every cliche in the book, in the general book, in the metaphorical sense, and so all the Swedes they're all depressed, and they're all they're all having therapy. Ulf has got a dog called Martin, who's in therapy as well. He's having Martin is challenged in the hearing department, and he's the only dog in Sweden who's been taught to lip read, and so we have great fun with that.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy writing those books. They are very quirky. They're very, very strange, but you know.
Oh, they're brilliant. But also the cast of characters around him is very different to the cast of characters in Botswana. So we have Blomqvist, who has lots to say. He has big thoughts. He goes off on big tangents.
He talks a lot about vitamins and health issues. Yes, poor Blomqvist. We feel very sorry for him, but he's an important character.
And as an author, that also allows you to go off on tangents and to give us a sense of what you think about vitamins and other things.
Oh, yes. No, every soapbox available is wheeled out for these books.
And so when you have an idea for a conundrum, how easy, difficult, down the middle of the road is it to decide whether that's going to be set in Sweden, whether that's going to be set in Botswana, or perhaps whether Bertie and the crew there will come to terms with it?
Yes, that's interesting. I think if something attracts my attention, and I have notebooks in which I will jot down ideas, if something attracts my attention, it will usually attract my attention in the context of one of my series. So I've got, six or seven series of books, and so an idea will suggest itself, which is clearly a Mauro Matsui idea or an Isabel Dalhousie idea. And generally I keep the fictional worlds quite separate, although occasionally they've somehow I've gone off track. There was one occasion which my editor in New York got in touch with me, and he was reading the latest manuscript of the latest Mauro Matsui book, and he said, by the way, on page 45 or whatever it is, Mauro Matsui is beginning to sound like Isabel Dalhousie. And I looked at it, and indeed he was right. I'd slipped into my Isabel Dalhousie mode. So Mauro Matsui is talking about county and obligation and things like that, which Isabel would talk about in more. So that happens occasionally. But it's the nature of the idea. If it's got a feel that's associated with a particular book or particular series, then it goes into that pile of ideas waiting to be dealt with for the next series. So there's some ideas which are very suited to my Portuguese irregular verbs series. That's a series about three German professors, Professor Dr. Norris Gaza, Moritz Maria von Egelfeld, Professor Dr. Detlef Amadeus Unterholzer, and Professor Dr. Florianus Prinzel. And I have great fun with these German professors. You know, German professors put all their doctorates in. You call yourself, you don't, in the English-speaking world, if you're a professor, you say, I'm Professor Jones, whatever it is. But in Germany, you put, I'm Professor Doctor, and then Professor Dr. so-and-so, Moritz Maria von Egelfeld. If you've got two doctorates, as many of them would have, you would say, I'm Professor Dr. Moritz Maria von Egelfeld. Now, a very interesting issue arises. If you've got, let's say you've got two doctorates, earned doctorates, and then you get an honorary doctorate, you then become Professor, Doctor, open brackets, honoris causa, close brackets, von Egelfeld. So that's right. Now, it gets more complicated. Let's say that you've got two honorary doctorates and two earned doctorates. Can you call yourself Professor, Doctor, open brackets, honoris causa, close brackets, open brackets, mult for many, close brackets, von Egelfeld? Or do you have to have at least three honorary doctorates before you can say mult, where it becomes many? Germany is divided on this issue. It really divides the... And of course, there is the case of if you're married, let's say that you're married to a professor, doctor, you would be Frau Professor, Doctor von Egelfeld. Very, very tricky, a really, really tricky issue.
You've got to get it right. You've written so many beautiful series, but you also write standalones.
Yes.
And some of these, well, you tell us, some of them, all of them, come from personal experience?
Some of them do, yes. I think they may result from my visiting a particular place or meeting a particular person. Could I give you an example of one of those?
Yeah.
I wrote a book called My Italian Bulldozer, which was based on personal experience, which I'll tell you about. I had been trying to finish a book, and I was being disturbed by various things, disturbances of day-to-day life. And so my wife suggested to me that I should go away for a couple of weeks and finish it elsewhere. So I thought, well, I might go to Italy because I'm a great Italophile, and it would be rather nice to go to Tuscany, in particular to a place called Montalcino, which is in the Sienese hills, not far from Siena. And I knew that I'd have peace there to do this. So I bought myself an airline ticket from Edinburgh to Pisa and went off to Pisa. And on the plane, I was sitting next to this very friendly Italian businessman who'd been in Scotland selling ceramics. He dealt with ceramics, tiles and things like that. The Italians make so beautifully. And he was going back from his business trip. We got chatting, and it passed the time on the flight very nicely. We arrived in Pisa. I got up, said goodbye to my new friend, went off to get my case, went into the baggage hall, got my case, then went to the car rental office and said, I've reserved a car, and I gave my passport to the young man behind the desk, and he sort of went to his computer and he said, sorry, no vehicle. And I said, but I booked this, and he said, no, you haven't. Fortunately, I had an email with me, a copy of the email, and it confirmed that I had this reservation. Passed this over to him, and he said, this is no longer valid. And so I was really quite cross about this, and I was beginning to remonstrate with this car firm when my new friend walked past from the plane. And he came over and he said, is there a problem here? And I said, yes, there is a problem. These people haven't got the car that I booked. And he spoke to them and he said, well, how about another vehicle? And they said, no, sorry, holiday weekend, all our vehicles are out. So he said, don't worry, come with me. I've got a friend who's got a vehicle rental place nearby. Come with me, we'll fix you up. Typical Italian generosity, friendliness. So off we went to his friend's place. And his friend appeared, great welcome there. And he explained the situation to his friend. His friend said, oh dear, I'm terribly sorry. This is a holiday weekend. All our cars are out. The only vehicle I've got left is a bulldozer. I said, I can't drive a bulldozer. I can't rent a bulldozer. Look, here's my license. It says license to drive cars. He said, no, in Italy, vehicles, that includes bulldozers. So I just can't. But I was in a really difficult situation, Julia, because these people were being so nice. And I really couldn't say to them. So I said, well, and so they took me out and they showed me the bulldozer. And, when you rent a vehicle, you walk around just to check that it's a... So I walked around the bulldozer and it appeared in order. And then he showed me, he said, come into the cab. I got into the cab and he said, this lever here, that's forward, push that forward, the bulldozer goes forward. Back is reverse. That one's the blade. Don't touch that one. And so I went back in. I signed the rental agreement. And I then had rented a bulldozer. So I got on the bulldozer and I drove off from Pisa to Montalcino in my bulldozer. And it's really very nice driving a bulldozer through the Italian countryside because you get a very good view of the surrounding countryside. And if there are any features of the surrounding countryside you don't like, well, you're on a bulldozer. So I arrived in Montalcino, and I went to the hotel, the Albergo Il Giglio, the Lily Inn, and showed my passport. Fortunately, they had my reservation. And they said, oh, welcome, yes, we've got your room. You can park your bulldozer. So I parked the bulldozer, and I had a really, really good time. And I went every morning for coffee at 11 o'clock with the local priest. I'd met in the piazza there, and we had a chat, and we chatted about all sorts of subjects. And the time went very, very well. And then the day before I was due to go home, the priest said to me, my brother-in-law's got a vineyard on the edge of Montalcino. They're very famous for their local beverages, and we've got a vineyard there, and my brother would like to entertain you for lunch tomorrow. Would you like to go for lunch at the vineyard? And I said, well, thanks very much. And so he said, could we go in your bulldozer, because my car's in the garage. And so the next morning, the priest and I got into the bulldozer and we drove to the vineyard, and the cousin was his brother rather, was very welcoming. We had this lovely Tuscan lunch. And then he said, I'll show you the vineyard. And he showed me around and he said, we're just outside the zone of production for Brunello de Montalcino. If we were within, I'd get far more for my grapes than I do currently get. And the zone of production boundary there is that little stone wall you see over there, and we're just on the wrong side of it. Do you think you could? I was in a very awkward position. I really was in a very awkward position. These people had been so courteous, so nice. So I said, okay, I'll do this. So I got into the bulldozer, went into reverse back, and then went bum. And I shifted the zone of production boundary to include his vineyard. And they were tremendously grateful. They really were extremely grateful. And so I decided to use that for a book. So that goes to show that there are things that are happening in your life which make for very good fiction. They're all true, but they can become very good fiction.
In your life. In your life. Absolutely fantastic story. Thank you. Wonderful. I'm sure you have questions, and we have a microphone. So if you've got a question for Alexander, do pop up your hand and we'll get the microphone to you. There's a question straight away in the front here, please. Oh, actually, there's a question. Okay, we'll go there. And then if we've got another mic to come here, please. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, give that, yep. Give that person a mic. Lovely, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. Alexander, your children's books. I'm a children's author,
right,
amongst many other things. Hi, Julia. And I'm wondering the reception that your children's books have received in comparison to the books that you write for adults. How would you describe that? And can you just share a little bit about your inspiration for writing children's books? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Well, thank you for that question. I started off writing books for children. Again, I mentioned the accidental in my literary career, and I think that the accidental occurs in everybody's life at various points. We don't really realize that it's an accidental development or a random development. But I started writing children's books because I'd entered a literary competition way back, run by Chambers, the publishers, and they asked for manuscripts in three categories: fiction, non-fiction, and then fiction for children. I entered a fiction manuscript, fiction for adults, and then a non-fiction manuscript, a fiction manuscript for children. And I was lucky enough to be one of the winners of the fiction for children prize. And so that started me writing children's books. And I wrote about 40 children's books over the years. And I still write the occasional children's books. I've written a new series called the Tobermory series about a school ship. I've written three books in that series. So it's different. I changed gear, so to speak, and ended up spending most of my time writing books for adults. But I still enjoy turning to children's fiction. And there's no great distinction. I think the sort of rigid distinction between children's literature and adult literature can be artificial, because we can all enjoy a children's book which is capable of being read as a work of adult fiction as well. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's the way I view it. I think I regard them as complementary. And of course there are a number of writers who write for both audiences. I've tended, over the last 20 years, I've been more or less completely concerned with adult fiction, or to the most greatest extent concerned with adult fiction, but I'm still very happy to write children's fiction from time to time.
Thank you. There was a question here. If you keep your hand up, and we'll get a microphone to you at the front here. Keep your hand high, person in the white shirt, that's it.
Hi. I was just wondering how your Swedish books were received in Sweden.
Well, yes, I was wondering that as well. Fortunately, I've got a very good Swedish friend who will read the manuscripts for me and point out any obvious howlers. So the sort of thing he said was that in Sweden, people rarely either call other people by their first name or by nothing at all. So he said that I was sounded a little bit formal in places. So I do have them looked at. I think that they have been translated into Swedish, and I've been interviewed by the Swedish newspapers and whatnot. And I think the Swedes might be a little bit puzzled as to why anybody is doing this. But I think they see the joke. I mean, the books really are intended to be humorous.
And what do they make of Bjorn Varg, Ulf's brother, being the head of the party of the moderate extremists?
His political party is the moderate extremists, and then the opposition to that is the extreme moderates. They were, I think they're probably a little bit bemused about it, but there is a political party in Sweden which sounds rather like the moderate extremists. They're called the something moderates. So it's not far removed from reality.
Yeah. Note that this person was here next. Yeah, thank you, because you've been waiting patiently. Yeah, and we will come back to you. Yeah, keep your hand up. That's it.
Hiya. I was just wondering about the writing process, because you're such a prolific author. How easy is it for you to write, and do you write quite quickly? You seem to write so many books.
Yes, I did I caught that. That was just a question in case...
about the writing process.
Yeah. I write about 5 or 6 books a year, and therefore I have to be quite disciplined, because one thing that I've learned as a writer is that books don't write themselves. I mean, many people take the view that books do write themselves, and an awful lot of people say, I've got a book within me. And I say, have you had an X-ray? Because with modern screening techniques, they can actually tell whether it's a biography or crime or whatever. It's really amazing, a very, very sophisticated MRI screening. But you do actually have to sit down and write, and so I hope that I'm reasonably disciplined about it. I have to travel quite a bit. I write when I travel. So I would write for about 2 hours a day, 2 or 3 hours a day, which is, I find, about as much as I can do. It's quite emotionally exhausting writing, as I suspect you know. But I write very quickly, and I don't say this in any boastful sense, I hope, but I do actually write very quickly. I write 1,000 words an hour. So, I don't really have to think very much, which some people say was apparent from the books. But I don't really have to sit there and think what's going to happen. I sit there and I go into what the psychiatrists would call a minor dissociative state. And I'm aware of my surroundings, but not 100% aware of them. And then I wouldn't say that I hear an internal voice, which the psychiatrists would have something to say about that as well. But I do hear, I hear a rhythm. I hear a sort of metrical beat, and the words just come out. So I don't, I'm not sitting there thinking about what's going to happen. It's not a cogitative process of the sort that many cogitative processes would be. I just sit there and it appears on the, I think the New Age people would say that I'm channeling. That's one way of describing the process, but I think what it is probably is being in touch with the subconscious mind, which I think is the source of fiction. Human mind is always asking what-if questions. So it's a question just of developing the brain pathways which go to that bit of the brain which is doing that work.
So interesting. There was a question just here, and then we'll come to the back after that, because keep your hand up in the yellow, yeah.
Yeah, just quickly, I had wanted to ask the question about the Italian bulldozer, or my Italian bulldozer, and I didn't think it would ever be raised at this point. But I'm always wondering what part of your personal experience is entwined in a book. So my question is, you've told the story of how it came about. Did you actually drive that bulldozer?
No. I could have prefaced my reply by saying, to be frank, no.
Great question, straight to the point.
But there are always some inconsistencies and doubtful elements in any story. I do go to Montalcino, but I went by car.
There was a question right at the back. If you keep your hand up and we'll get a microphone, great.
Hello, this is an invitation and a question. I'm from the Hong Kong Literary Festival, and I'd like to invite Bertie to come on a language exchange program to Hong Kong. And for you to come to Hong Kong to explore where we take pushy mums, people like myself, to exhilarating heights. So that's just a comment there. A question for you. You have such interesting characters in each of your books. Do you run them through? Do you run them by someone to see, oh, I got this person. What do you think? Or do you just go with your own gut feeling?
Thank you for that question. I think the characters come to me, and I tend not to discuss the characters very much with friends or editors or agents. So they just occur to me, and they'll occur to me in a very odd way. I don't actually see them. I don't see my characters. I never really describe my characters' faces or appearance. I'll sometimes describe what they're wearing, but they're a sort of vague presence in my mind. So I never really talk about what Mara Matsui looks like other than saying that she's traditionally built. And indeed, when they were filming Anthony Mangela's film of the No.1 Ladies Detective Agency, they took me there to see some of the filming, and they took me to meet Jill Scott, who played Mara Matsui so well in the film. And then they said, some journalists said to me, well, how about that? Is that Mara Matsui? And I said, yes, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't have this very specific picture of her in my mind, as long as she has a warm smile was the main one. So the characters just occur to me, and they occur at odd moments. The professor, Dr. von Egelfeld, occurred to me when I was going for a run by the Edinburgh Canal with an old friend of mine who's a German professor and who's the godfather of my younger daughter. And he's a very tall German professor. He's 6'4", and he's a very fine tennis player. And he said to me, may I suggest that you write a book about a German professor who's very good at playing tennis? And wishing to be accommodating, I said yes. And that was how Professor Dr. Morris Maria von Egelfeld was. And then Sister Maria Fiore de Montagna, who's an Italian nun with social ambitions, she just suddenly came to me. Suddenly there was a nun present in a rather vague way, and that proved to be Sister Maria Fiore de Montagna, who does a very good line in aphorisms. So these characters come from heaven knows where. I don't base them on people I've met. I don't really like to base a literary character on somebody, because I think that is potentially somewhat intrusive, and the person doesn't necessarily have the chance to answer back. I do put real people into my books. I put actual people with their consent. So, for example, one of the earlier first ministers of Scotland, I was at some do, and the then First Minister, Jack McConnell, came up to me and he said, he was reading Scotland Street in the Scotsman, and I said, well, First Minister, would you like to be in the book? And he said, well, yes, I wouldn't mind. And so I then had to try and find something for him to do. And so what I did was I created a scene whereby Bertie is crossing an Edinburgh street in an unauthorized way, and the 23 buses coming down the hill, charging towards him, and Bertie freezes in the middle of the road. And it just so happens that the First Minister of Scotland is walking on the pavement up the road, and he bravely dashes out and he rescues Bertie, takes Bertie. So I wrote this, and we sent it to the First Minister's press secretary and said, show this to the First Minister, is this okay? And within 45 minutes, back came the response, very satisfactory. He'd had a bad press recently, and so this was exactly right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I do put real people in, but the others. That's not to say that people don't think that they are there in the books. Occasionally, people come and say, am I so and so? There was one lady who was terribly worried that she was Bertie's mother. And she came to me and said, I'm not Irene, am I? I'm not Irene. And I hadn't based it on her, but I really felt I was saying, now that you mention it. Because she was quite like Irene,
Yeah. Other questions? Down the front, in the third row here in the patterned shirt. Yes.
Professor McCall Smith, a constant theme in all your books and all your series is, you touched earlier on kindness, but morality.
Yeah.
And has your view of morality changed through your career and your life? Is it different now to what it was before?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. That's a very interesting question. Yes, I hope so, because I think that we all change as we go through life. I'm very interested philosophically in the concept of personal identity and how people's identity and their character changes as they go through life. And I think I would hate to be today what I was like at 15. Being a 15-year-old boy is pretty awful. And so I think that we develop, and our moral outlook changes, I would hope. I think generally speaking, our understanding of other people increases as our experiences increase. Now, of course, it may work the other way, I suppose, that people, as they get longer in the tooth, may become less tolerant of the divergent views of other people, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, yes, I think you probably retain certain deep convictions or deep characteristics. Character's a very interesting concept, isn't it? It rather went out of fashion in philosophical discussion, and psychologists had their doubts about the notion of character. But I think most of us understand what is meant by character as being a collection of traits and attitudes and so on. And so, yes, I think that does change. And I think that, generally speaking, we're all affected by shifts in the moral compass or in the nature of our moral surroundings. So we become more sensitive to the feelings of others if society is encouraging that sensitivity and so on. So yes, I mean, it's a really interesting question you raise. That's not a very satisfactory answer, but that's the way I look at it.
No, it absolutely is a satisfactory answer, I think. We haven't got time for any more questions, but we have got time for one more treat. You're very happy to do a reading of one of your wonderful poems, but while you're finding that, Scandi,
Yep.
I would like to say thank you very much to you for coming. Some great questions. You'll be doing a book signing afterwards, so if you've got any morality questions, this is your gentleman. That will be over in that direction. I'd like to say thank you to Emirates Airline, to Dubai Culture, to the Emirates Literature Foundation, and to the session sponsor, Dubai Duty Free. Scandi, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Julia. I'd like to read a brief poem from my collection of poetry published a couple of years ago called In a Time of Distance, which got this gorgeous cover there by my great friend who's also an illustrator, Ian McIntosh. And I like signs. When I travel, I'm quite interested in seeing the signs that you see. Sometimes you see rather peculiar signs in your travels, and sometimes I make a poem out of the signs that I see. And this poem is an example of that. I was being driven from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara in a car provided by my American publishers, and we were going along this highway, gorgeous California sunshine, and suddenly this sign appeared on this freeway, and it read literally this: College of Hypnotherapy, next right. Now, it's only in California that you would see a road sign which said College of Hypnotherapy, next right. It's very, very Californian. And I thought this was wonderful. So there and then, in the car, I wrote a poem called College of Hypnotherapy, next right. So imagine we're in this car gliding along the highway there near Los Angeles. This winter sunshine, attenuated but still warm, is the democratic air through which the gliding limos and the working trucks move equally. Bare hills describe the outer limits to this Los Angeles landscape, indicate the boundaries of the possible in a place where anything can be done. For this is where illusion has its kingdom, where things can mean what you want them to mean and more, where the paying customer is only too ready and willing to be told that being fooled is satisfactory entertainment. The autumnal fall of leaves is not an issue here. Along the banks of this interminable highway are eucalypts, tipu trees, riots of bougainvillea, all asserting that perpetual summer pertains in this south. Even one suspects the lotus itself blooms here, tended for personal use, of course. Somewhere under the glitter of distant gleaming towers, somewhere under the acres of quite undifferentiated roofs, there is an old history here of conquest, dispossession, of forgotten missions, of old and modern empires, locked in a tawdry struggle for the right to name. And now Mexico seems ever closer than it was. Spanish seeps into the interstices of a Protestant life that's never been all that happy in the sun. Kisses and softens Anglo-Saxon place names that need only a vowel to make the transition to sympathy and the guitar. The signs flash past. City of 1,000 Oaks, first exit ahead. I count only 6, planted along an unexceptional concrete mall. 900 and more must be elsewhere, as many promises are in a place that assures you your future is attainable. And then a sign warns, College of Hypnotherapy, next right. This says so much. You will leave the road. Close your eyes and let